All right, well, welcome everyone to visual regression testing with BackstopJS. Thank you. Thank you, Alex. I was telling Alex beforehand, he warned me that he was not going to heckle, and I told him, like, how would I know that he's here if he doesn't heckle me at least a little bit? So thank you. My name is David Needham. I'm a developer advocate at Pantheon. What that means is I get the pleasure of being out in the community, creating training curriculum, workshops just like this, encouraging people to use best practices on the web, building websites, working as teams, and then I take everything that I learn through contributing back to the Drupal and WordPress and PHP communities. I bring it back to Pantheon so that we're creating hosting and web ops workflows that are useful and genuinely something that people want to use. So that's what I do. I spend a lot of time creating training curriculum, really. So this course, this visual regression testing with BackstopJS, originated as a full-day workshop. And over the last year and a half or so, I've given it as a lightning talk and a session, a half-day workshop, full-day workshop. But every time, I try to keep the slides more or less the same. So the reason for this is because this is actually very, very easy to get into. If you've never used visual regression testing, the steps to get started with it are very simple. And so I'm going to go through my slides kind of describing what visual regression testing is, why you might want to use it. And as we go, there'll be some exercises in here that I'm going to do some of, maybe slightly accelerated, but you have access to these slides as well. You can go to davidneedham.me/WCBoise2019. You'll get access to the slides. Later on, you'll get access to the recording and all of that stuff. And you can actually follow along. You can go through these steps later on and actually start using BackstopJS to put it on your site. So this is the agenda. Like I said, we're going to go through this much more quickly than we would if this was a full-day workshop. But we'll be able to get through pretty much all of these things. So, like I said, this is a workshop. There's a bunch of things that you might need to start with. I'm more or less going to skip over this slide, but what you should know is you need Node.js and NPM. Once you get that, you need BackstopJS. And I'm installing this globally, meaning I can run Backstop from anywhere on my computer, which is helpful as I start going from one project to the other. I can just run it. I don't have to reinstall it for each project. So, visual regression testing. If you're not familiar with the term, you might be asking what it is. And certainly when I first got started using visual regression testing, or when I first attended a workshop or a session that mentioned visual regression testing, I had no idea what it was actually talking about. So what I did is I Googled it. I started by getting the definition. And if you look up the definition of regression, it says to return to a former or less developed state. And this is just like a Webster dictionary, but I think it's totally appropriate when you're talking about a website. As you're building a website, you're improving it, you're making things better, you're fixing bugs, but regression takes you back. You reintroduce some sort of a bug that you didn't intend. You're not improving the website, but making it worse. So what are some cases when you may have been plagued by visual regression? And I will ask the audience. Yes, go ahead.
So I had to refactor some SAS mixins, and I forgot to include one of the grid layouts. And so if on my device, it was fine because the viewport was pretty small, but on like large devices, everything was aligned left. There was all this huge white space, and I totally didn't catch it, and it was production.
Ooh, yeah. You never want that to go to production. But it's easy though. When you're just working locally, you have your own environment, everything's perfect and set up the way that you work in. It's easy to let things like that go through.
I don't like look at it locally on my TV, which is the case in this. So like, we're looking at it on the TV in the conference room, and I'm like, oh.
Yeah, on the TV especially. Anyone else? Okay, well, there are two major cases that we're going to talk about today. One of them has to do with theming specifically, but the first one has to do with just routine security updates or patches, or you're doing updates for your plugins. Whenever you do a plugin update, you don't expect anything to change, more or less. Like there might be new functionality, but you don't expect your site to ever break, right? It would be good to know if something is visually changing on your website after doing a plugin update or a theme update. Whew. Well, another one is theming and site building. As you're going through, you're making changes to your site, and you expect things to change. You expect to see visual differences as you start using your Sass and you start using your JavaScript, but you only expect specific things to change. And we'll talk more about that later too. So looking at this first use case, this routine updates, if you're in your website and you see that there's an update available and you click the button, you apply WordPress core or some other update that might be there, you apply it. So you do the right thing, you open up your site, you look at the live version of your website, and you say, okay, I'm familiar with the website, this is what it looks like, I know what to expect. And then you flip over to the dev version of the site that has the update, and you're flipping through it, and you're like, yeah, I don't see anything different. That looks perfect, right? This is visual QA. This is you as a person, as a human, looking at the site and comparing the two types of URLs, the two versions of the site. Well, maybe you even use some tools. Maybe you use a tool that will help you do this a little bit better. Maybe you can do it side by side, have it scroll automatically, scroll through those two different sites so you can see them even more closely, what the difference is. And then maybe mobile, you're doing the right thing, you're checking at different breakpoints. You want to make sure that you're not breaking the site at all the various breakpoints that are possible that your customers care about. Well, did anyone actually catch the difference? Yeah, it gets a little bit easier as you go through, but it gets much easier when you use a tool like BackstopJS. It actually highlights the differences. It uses computers to take screenshots of one version of a site and another version of a site, and then overlays them and highlights every pixel that's different. So you can see in this case, it will actually show the diff. It'll show this bright orange, or I'm sorry, a purple sort of color here to show what's changed. And then if you click on it, you can actually do the scrubber and actually go back and forth, and you can see exactly what changed. And this specific change may not actually matter. Nobody might care about if the text changed, but still, you might want to know that. And this might be just a very minor detail that it'll catch everything else as well. So there are lots of benefits to using a visual regression tool. You get this sort of reference versus test comparison. So if you're working in a production live environment versus a development or even a local development environment, you should definitely be doing that if you're not already. But you get this comparison from one to the other. Reference in this case being production, it's the sort of like perfect completed version of the website that you don't want to regress from. So that's our reference image that we're going to be creating later. And then the test is the version that you want to compare. You're making changes in this environment. It also supports multiple viewports. Okay, so if testing each page on your website and like visually QA, visually making sure nothing broke wasn't hard enough on one breakpoint, now what about if you care about mobile? What about if you care about tablet or TVs? It can be a pain to do that. It becomes exponential, the number of pages you have to test. And again, as a human, the more and more you have to test, the harder it becomes for us to actually catch some minor detail that's changed. And so you can actually set it up. There are scripts in place where you can actually have a spider crawl your site and tell it, be aware of every page on my website. And then when you test every page and tell me what pages are different. Of course, if you have lots of pages, if you have more than maybe about 15 or 20 pages on your website, you probably don't want it to scan every page because every test will take a long time. And then every time you make a change, you have to wait that long for it to finish, and that's no good. So in these cases, I've seen a best practice being sort of picking I forget the exact term, but it's like a canary. You pick like the type of content that's representative of the other types of content in that category. So if you have a lot of blog posts, you might pick one or two blog posts that are like pretty normal. They have the things that every other blog post has. Or if you have products, you pick a couple of those that are representative. And then you test those pages so that they're consistent and you don't miss anything. There is error reporting. It will give you some errors that will tell you exactly what's changed throughout, and we'll see the reports in a minute. And then it is super, super, super easy to write tests. We're going to take a look at the code in just a minute, but the code, I think, is pretty easy. It's pretty easy to read. It's pretty easy to tell what it's doing. And it's one of those things where, like, when I first got into PHP, I learned it from copy and pasting what other people did and changing it to do what I wanted it to do. You can absolutely do this with BackstopJS. In fact, we'll be doing that in a minute. There are some limits to visual regression testing, though. So one of the biggest limits to visual regression testing is that there is a lot of noise. You might have noticed on that report, the GIF that we saw earlier where it was comparing the two, there were some minor pixel differences up in the header that were totally unrelated to the button changing. Sometimes that happens. If you have a slideshow or any dynamic content that's moving, that can often be very pixel difference, it can be introduce errors. Also, if you have any live content, if people are constantly changing things on live, or if it's grabbing random content or a featured thing of the day, that can definitely introduce errors for your local development environment that may not have refreshed with the database recently. And then also if you're pulling in like social media feeds or YouTube videos or anything like that, those are other cases where you might have to tell your visual regression tool to manually exclude those areas because they'll introduce errors every single time. And again, false negatives, yes, it's the same sort of thing. Difficulties with dynamic content, but at the end of the day, this still saves you time because you're still able to see what the differences are, even if you have to ignore a failure because your YouTube video is putting static because they, for some reason, generate static that is different every time. If it doesn't load the video, super frustrating. But still, at the end of the day, this process still is a huge time saver and it helps you catch bugs before they get to production. So let's actually start talking about BackstopJS specifically. This is one of many tools you can use, and I'm going to be running this locally on my computer, but you'll see later we can set it up to run on a continuous integration process. You can also choose one of the many product, visual regression as a service sort of products out there that you can buy, subscribe to, type in 2 URLs, and it'll do it for you. But BackstopJS is super easy, so I'm excited to share that with you today. So with BackstopJS, you can sort of render your browser and using a number of different headless options. So Chromium and Puppeteer are just two of the options. You can actually simulate user interactions. So if you want someone to like click through a menu or click through something before it takes that screenshot, you can have it do that for you. You do also get a browser report. So we'll see in a minute, it will pop up in your browser. You'll see all the visual diffs in there. But it does also provide command line reports, error and pass. So you can pass it through other texts or kind of know what to do from the command line if you're writing a script. And it does play really nice with Circle CI or other continuous integration steps where it's just looking at the CLI. In this case, as I mentioned earlier, I'm running this globally on my computer so I can run it from anywhere, but you can also set this up to be within a packaged Node app, and we'll be taking a look at an example of that later on as well. And it really does just come down to 3 steps. We're going to see those steps actually in the very next thing. So everything to configure your BackstopJS test comes down to this backstop.json file. Within here, we define the viewports that we want. So the default here is just looking at a phone and a tablet, and the width and height are all defined here. And then whatever scenarios you want to pass through to it. And so a scenario is a single test, a single page on the website that you want to compare. So you put in a label, you put in the URL, and this is like your local development URL or your dev environment URL versus the reference URL. And again, the reference is that sort of perfect, completed, live version of your website. So for the example that we have here today, I have my site running locally with Lando. It's a local Docker-based development environment. And so, the URL that I'm looking at here, it ends up with .lndo.site, and I'm comparing it versus this live website, pantheondemo.com. And there's a bunch of other things that you can include in here. And these are included by default, and you can see things like remove selectors. So if you want to just use the typical like CSS or JavaScript selectors, classes and IDs, to hide or totally remove them from the page before a screenshot is taken, you can do that. You can also set a delay if you need to wait for things to load. You can also wait until a particular thing is loaded or ready to go. You can preload cookies if you want to get like a logged in instance and have them test something in the admin interface as a logged in user. Those are all things you can do. We're really just going to be taking a look at a very limited number of these things today to keep it simple. All right, so let's go through our first exercise. So I have all of this set up. I have let me go ahead and exit full screen. I have a website here, and this is my local site. I can see that because it is .lndo.site. And then I have a live version at pantheondemo.com. And if I refresh both of these, you'll see they're actually the same. Because they loaded at separate times, that initial image is different, but yeah, they're pretty much identical. So let's see if they're identical by using visual regression testing. So let me go through this. I'm going to navigate to my local project. So I'm going to use this for my command line. I am navigated to my local project, Pantheon Weekly Demo site, and I'm just going to do a backstop init. So you can go into any project and run backstop init, and it's going to set up a default backstop.json. It's going to set up the folder structure where it's going to put all the screenshots, generate the HTML for the reports, and everything that's needed to run backstop for this particular project. So it's, in this case, totally resetting it and getting it ready to go for a fresh test. If I take a look at that backstop.json file now, I'm just going to open it up in my local code editor, Atom. I can see it looks just like that example I showed you before. It starts with viewports, which is where we can define all the different breakpoints that we want, all the various things that we want to test it on. There's a section here for on, ready, before and after for JavaScript. In this case, this is some example stuff that kind of gets in the way with the demo, so I'm just going to remove this. We don't need it, but if you're interested in doing even more, this is a cool example to look at later on. And then we have our scenarios. So let me go ahead and put in a label. We're going to say this is the Pantheon demo homepage. We have this cookies here, which again is helping with like if you have logged in or you want to pass in some other cookie related functionality. We don't care about that, so I'll remove that. And then we have the URL and the reference URL right after it. So let me go back to my site. I'm going to grab my URL, which is my local environment. I'm going to put that in here. I'm going to go back to my other sites. I'm going to grab the live URL, pantheondemo.com, put that in the reference. And then if I scroll down, let me just double check. I don't think there's anything else we need to change. So I'm just going to click save to save what I have here. And now if I go back to my code, or back to my command line, if I just run backstop reference, it's going to take reference screenshots of the reference URL, so the live version of the website. The thinking here is that you may only need to create the reference images once for any given suite of tests that you're about to do. You take a reference screenshot, and then as you make changes, you compare it against that reference. So if your live site is continually getting new content, you don't have to continually reset your local environment to match it. So it takes a reference, which it just did, and now it helpfully says, hey, now you can run backstop test to generate a diff report. So backstop test. So you may have noticed we've only run 3 commands so far. We have backstop init to start the project and get it all initialized, backstop reference to take the reference screenshots, and backstop test to actually run the test. And so as you can see here, we have our test, and it is the reference image, the test image, and then the diff. And as expected, there is a rotating slideshow at the top. These are different. They don't look different here, but they're loading at slightly different times, and you can see they probably haven't fully loaded, and so it's slightly grayed out because it hasn't finished. So some ways that we can help with that, if we go back to our backstop.json, we can just put in a delay, and in this case it is in milliseconds. So if I say 500 milliseconds, go back to our code, because we're changing the definition of our test, the terms on what's being tested and all the criteria, we need to create new reference screenshots because that has changed. So backstop reference. Backstop test. And there we go. So this test has passed. There are no visual differences between our local development environment and our live version of our site. So now we can go through, do whatever we want to do to modify this version of our site, and it's going to work. So we can actually compare now. So anything that we change after this point should be easy to detect, and we can make sure that we're not accidentally changing things that break other parts of our site. Speaking of which, the second killer use case is theming. How often have you had a scenario like this where you're like, oh yeah, it's just a quick fix. I'm just gonna go in and change the CSS and then it'll be done and then I won't have to worry about it. It's Friday, it's like 4:45 p.m., not a problem. It's just CSS, right? So you go in, you make the change and you call it in and at like 1 minute before you walk out the door, you realize that, oh yeah, that CSS, that class, maybe it wasn't specific enough. Maybe I changed a bunch of pages on the website all at once, or it reintroduced some other sort of problem. Yeah, that happens all the time. Well, let's run through a quick scenario where we try to take a look at that. What happens if we change things? We'll talk about this in a minute, but let's actually take a look. So here's my site. What if we're tasked with changing the color of that button? Maybe we have decided, our marketing team, our designer has taken a look at our website and they've said, man, like, I understand why we chose purple for that buy tickets button back in the day. Like it looks pretty good on the page, but we really want something that represents our brand. We want something that's a little bit more like that Pantheon yellow color. So what if we tried to change the buy tickets button to yellow? I think it would make it pop more. I think we'd sell more tickets. So let's just make that change. So, okay, we can do that. Let's go back. Here's my local environment. I'm going to do Atom again to jump into my site, and I'm going to say, I'm within themes. So I'm going to jump in and edit my CSS file. So if I come in here, I can see it's currently purple. I don't remember the exact hex for the exact Pantheon yellow, but just for the sake of the example, to keep it moving, I'm just going to type in yellow. And this is probably going to be terrible because it's going to be way too bright of a yellow to work there, but we'll see it anyway. So I click save. I go in and jump over to my browser. I go to my local site and I refresh. Yeah, okay, well, we can work with this. Yeah, no, that's not great, but we can make it a little bit better. We can go in and we can say, well, color, let's make it black. Let's go back and refresh. So yeah, okay. I mean, it still doesn't match the color, but it's on the protector it looks pretty close, right? Let's just say that it's the same, just to keep the exercise moving. So we've made this change. We can certainly tell that it's fine here. But what if we run that test again? So we have not changed the terms of the test. We haven't changed the viewports or the URLs or anything that the reference needs to change. So all that we have to do is just do a test again. So no, because the reference, the live version of the site hasn't changed, and we haven't changed the definition of what's being tested. So the reference is only right. The reference is looking specifically at the reference URL, which we're putting as the live site. Yep. So because we haven't changed anything about what's being tested, this should be a fair representation. And we can see here, it has highlighted that, yeah, that's changed. There. Certainly. But how can we be sure that this didn't break something on some other page? Well, let's go ahead and close some of these reports that keep popping up. What if we change the viewports to make sure that this doesn't break at a mobile or on tablet or something else? How can we check to make sure that we have the right pages, that not just the front page, but what if we want to also check the login page? What if we want to check something else? Well, not a problem. We can go back to our backstop.json file where we defined the scenario, we defined the breakpoints, or really just left the viewports how they are. What if we wanted to also accommodate a TB to say, let's keep your problem from coming up again? What if we wanted to add the label TB? What's a good width and height for a TB? A lot. I need something more specific than that.
27,000 pixels.
That might be a bit much.
Let's try 4096.
4096 by. You can just make it up.
2040.
2040. Okay. So we've added a new scenario or a new viewport. So now we'll get 3 of those. Oh, I guess I didn't share that actually. But back on that report that we're comparing, so we looked at the phone one. But if you scroll down, you can actually look at the tablet one too. So that's there. So as we add this new viewport, it's going to be yet another one we can scroll down and find. But what if we want to test, let's say, a login page? So this is a Drupal website. And so the login page for this is /user/login. So let me go ahead and just add another scenario. We really only need these three things to do a scenario, the label, the URL, and the reference URL. So let's go ahead and put in a second scenario. I'm going to be careful to do that right. Okay. Oh, I'm still missing something. Yep. There we go. Okay. Cool. So Pantheon demo homepage, Pantheon demo login page, perhaps. And it's /user/login, and I'll do /user/login. Click save, and I think that's good. So let's go back. Going to do, again, in this case, we did change the definition. We changed the test, like what's being tested. We do need new reference images generated. So we can do backstop reference. It's going to generate references, and you can maybe start to see how this could become an exponentially longer problem as you add more breakpoints, as you add more pages. Because it doesn't, I mean, every time you add a page, yes, but then every time you add a breakpoint, that's another, like it's a multiple, right? So this is fine, like because we have 3 and 2, but if you start scanning every page on your website, this is why you want the sort of representative pages to test. Okay, very good. So now we'll do backstop test. This is where you might step away to grab some coffee, maybe chat with a coworker. You can see as it's coming in, there are errors, and it tells you for each breakpoint and page with like, it just says error compare page, and you just know from seeing it that that means that there's some sort of a visual change. But we're expecting that, right? We've made a change already, but now we can see there is a phone, a tablet, and a TV breakpoint. Oh, wow, that looks terrible. Wow.
Welcome to my world.
Right? Yeah, so obviously we haven't even tested for our demo site on making sure that it's good for a TV. But that's okay. Well, let's go back. So that now we have those 3 for the front page, and then we also have this login page. And unfortunately, also because our demo site is not built very well, our login page does have the login there at the very bottom, but it also has everything else that's on the front page. So it doesn't look super awesome, but it is there. We have the URL being referenced. We have it for each of 3 breakpoints for that one as well. So this is how you do it. This is how you extend and write your own tests. You can choose any 2 URLs that you want. You can add any breakpoints you want. You can add any additional scenarios that you want. And every time that you run it, it's going to compare and generate this report for you. So that's pretty cool. But what if we want to do a little bit more? What if we want to include some sort of an automated test? What if instead of just running it locally, we want to start including this as part of a workflow where maybe we, again, setting up the scenario, maybe we use GitHub. Maybe we use GitHub as the place where we grab our code from. We're using Git. We have a workflow that says when I, as the developer, am trying to make a change to the site, I need to make a branch, work locally. I make a pull request back on GitHub, and I want the pull request in GitHub to include the results of all the tests so that our maybe our senior developer, or maybe even our project manager, someone who's very non-technical, can go in, look at the results of the test, understand whether it's working or not, and then make a decision about like, yes, this pull request is accepted and it can be pulled into the project, or like it failed, you need to go back and try something else. So continuous integration can definitely allow you to do things like that. It can get very complicated, of course. So let me go through these a little quickly. But what we're trying to decide here is what parts of your job can robots do better and faster than you? Catching visual changes, humans are pretty bad at that. Very subtle things, we're not good at that. Robots can do that much better and much faster. Anytime that we can write a script to automate something that's boring and monotonous and error prone, we're making our job better. We're also being better employees and all of that stuff too. So what if you wanted to update all of your code, all of your plugins, all of your WordPress core every time that there's an update automatically without you having to even touch it or know that it's happening? It sounds a little bit scary to have it just automatically happen. And in some places, some sites are already offering this feature, so it's nothing new necessarily. But we have an auto update script that you can kind of take a look at. You can apply this to any project, any site, but it goes in, it checks for updates. If there's a plugin update or a core update available, it will create a branch. It will dedicate an environment on Pantheon to that branch. It will hit that branch with a bunch of tests, visual regression, behavior testing, performance testing, a few other things, just to make sure that everything's running smoothly. If the visual regression test says after applying all of these updates, there's no pixel differences, everything passes perfectly, then we back up our dev test live environments, we merge it, deploy it to live, and everything's good. And maybe you get a Slack notification to say that updates have been applied successfully. So that's one example. This one's actually pretty easy to set up because you can just follow the directions in the Git repository. It will go through and explain what you need to set up. And like I said, you can adopt this or adapt this to other projects you might be working on. Now, another example is even more complicated. Even more complicated, so much so that we're actually teaching a full day class at DrupalCon in Minneapolis this next year. It is obviously DrupalCon, it's about Drupal. And part of the reason for this is because we're including Composer as part of this workflow as well. Building out your site with Composer using Drupal. In theory, this could be applied to a WordPress project as well. WordPress is also starting to use Composer more regularly. And the work that we talk about in this class really doesn't have a whole lot to do with Drupal itself. It's more about the workflow. It's about going through and you say, in this case, adding a module, adding a plugin using Composer, and going through the process to create a pull request in a branch and having that workflow respond by generating a report and building the site out and on a hosting environment. We try to make this agnostic as possible. Like, yes, I work for Pantheon. Yes, we're using GitHub and we're also using Circle CI. But what we're trying to teach in this case is not using these tools. It's more about the idea. It's about the workflow and seeing how all the pieces fit together. So that's a class. You can also just go and grab, we have a link here to get the script. If you want to try setting it up and running it yourself, you can absolutely just do that and try it. I think we also probably have some recordings online where you can step through that yourself if you'd like. Okay, and then we only have a little while left, I guess, but we have a standalone app as well. Let's say, again, another scenario we're creating here. Maybe you are the senior developer. Maybe you are the person on your team that's responsible for making code changes, and you want to empower your QA team or your team that handles maintenance on all these projects to be able to quickly QA test their websites, to be able to check for visual changes without them having to use their eyeballs to visually compare every little thing. And maybe, again, just keeping it simple, maybe they don't know code. Maybe they don't want to write code. That's not part of what they're all about. Well, you can actually write a Node app that will run on their computer that you could set up through Alfred to run, or you could run it on a command line, or you could set up an app or button, they just click on their interface, and it will run tests for them. They can pick from a list which site they want to test and have it actually generate the report and pop up. So let's take a look at that example. So we have the example repo. You can go and grab this. And again, if this was part of a full day workshop, you would actually be setting this up on your computer. But because you have access to the slides, you can absolutely just do this on your own later on. So if we set up this project, I already have some of this set up. I have I'm already through to the npm install. If I just do npm run start, we'll be able to see it up and running. So if I do npm run start, and again, I'm running this from my command line. I didn't set up like a local app or icon or anything that runs the script. Or I'm not using Alfred, to like generate this. But and it prompts me and it says, which site do you want to test? So we pick one. We'll say, let's do WordPress at scale. And I haven't done this in a while, so we might see some errors. But we picked it from the list. It's going through and kind of running BackstopJS based on all the criteria that's been predefined on what pages, what viewports, and all those different things. We could even pass the JavaScript steps to step through a process and click buttons or pass through cookies, have it be logged in.
While it's running with that cookie login, is it as simple as just like literally copying the cookie from the browser that you're using when you're logged in, or do you have to do something to generate that?
So I have never set up the cookie login myself, but from reading the documentation, that's the impression I got. Is you just use like your current session cookie, have it be plugged in, and yep. So I don't actually know what all pages this is testing. So we'll see. I'm hoping it doesn't take very much longer. But what I'll be able to demonstrate in just a moment is like, yeah, these are 2 sites. But the process to add a 3rd site or a 4th site or anything like that is just as easy as, again, changing that backstop.json file. Ooh, it looks like I timed out on something. That's not good. Like I said, it's been a while since I've ran this particular demo, so it may not have been updated with something else. But let me go ahead and just cancel this and show you exactly how to add in a new site. Let's just assume that it worked. Keep the demo moving, keep the momentum, and let's just say that we wanted to modify that. Well, it's actually pretty easy to customize the example. If we take a look, and again, the slides tell you exactly what you can do. If we just go into the INC file, and within there we look at the sites to test, we'll be able to see all of the things that have been set up as part of the script. So let me just do an atom from here and show you, so you can actually see the folder structure. So we go into the Inc folder. From within here, we go into sites to test, and you can actually see all of the various sites that are here, and there's only 2. Oh, and I actually picked the wrong. I should not have picked this one because look at all the pages it's testing. So that's why it took a very long time. But if we wanted to test a different one, maybe we let's put in our demo site, right? The one we've been working with all this time. If I just take this example. Let's grab it there. Good. And I'll do Pantheon demo. We add in a label. We have the production base URL, which I should have in my clipboard history. And then we have the Lando local URL for the non-production. And then paths to test. Let's just do, maybe we'll just do the home, and then we can do that user/login. So it's the same scenario that we had before, but we'll set it up for here, click save. And then if I go back again and I do npm run start, oh, I made a mistake. Extra brace. Line 21. This one. Yeah. Cool. There we go. So now we have Pantheon demo on the list. We choose that one, and now it's going to go through and run the test for Pantheon demo that we've already predefined. So it's pretty approachable. Like, I feel like the tests are pretty easy to pick up and customize and run on your own, but it's also easy to make it in such a way that other people who maybe don't feel comfortable modifying tests can also just run through and have it be tested for them. So I expect this will pop up in just a minute, but let's keep things moving. I always like to leave room for questions at the end. And this is totally going to interrupt me in a moment. I know it is. As soon as I actually start, it's going to pop up with that test because it's going to be completed. But so this is all in the effort of, there we go. This is all in the effort of web ops. Like, web ops is some terminology that Pantheon has identified as being like the practices that support and sort of your team, everyone that touches the website, whether they're the project manager, the developer, the designer, the person that runs the A/B test, the person that is responsible for keeping the project moving. They're all part of a web ops team. They're all responsible for making these changes on the website, and I think historically it's been difficult for everyone to have sort of an easy way to communicate about what's going on the site. And the idea of working within web ops, using tools like visual regression testing, BackstopJS, using continuous integration and automated testing, setting up these advanced workflows that take care of that, facilitate better communication on your team. It facilitates the ability to work in a way that's more agile. You can iterate more quickly, not have to wait for like a waterfall, sort of like the entire thing, monolithic thing being completed. You can make lots of iterations quickly. Tools like this make that possible because your confidence is there. You know that it's going to work with this little change because you can see that it works in the test pass. So that's why I'm here today. That's why I'm happy to kind of share visual regression testing with you all. So thank you all very much. I hope you have a good rest of camp. Question, yes. Okay. So the last step of the workflow is backstop approve. So there is a process that I'm not using for this workflow where you can approve or reject a change as being something you're expecting. I don't actually have a whole lot of experience using backstop approve, so I can't say for sure. But yeah, the documentation should have good examples for you.
So in terms of running this in a CI, I think like that would be the most way of doing it. I mean, certainly it's helpful locally, but like really when I go into the commit, could you maybe go to that slide two, the option two you have?
The option, which one?
Commit, I think it was. Yeah,
this one? Mm-hmm.
So within this kind of context, I'm assuming that you're actually having to copy the code from your production environment somehow into your continuous integration to diff those two environments. Is that right?
No. So in this case, so let me try to repeat the question. So for this particular example, your question was, you assumed that you have to pull the code in from the production environment into continuous integration in order to test it. The content. Oh, sure. Yeah. So the way that it works with this particular script, you know, you can set it up any way that you want. We are creating a branch of master on the site. We are generating an environment dedicated to that branch. So you can have a URL, a custom dev URL to look at, and then you compare that with live. And since you just created it, it's the same.
Yeah, so you're not testing the code that's on the CI server itself. You're actually using Pantheon's tools to generate that test in that dev environment.
Well, no, we're testing the code that's changed in GitHub in this case. So as you're developing your site locally and you're working on it, you make a change, push it to GitHub. Circle CI in this case picks up your code change, pushes that over to Pantheon, but you could push it to any hosting provider, and then generates that new site with the production plus your custom code, and then uses that to generate the diff. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you all very much.